still have some people showing up, so I'll give it just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're tapering off, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Vasquez. I got it right this time. And I am the president of the Massachusetts Animal Coalition. But thank you guys all for being here with us tonight. This is our final webinar series that we have put together so far for 2021. And we're really excited to have Amy Christian present with us. This is a great topic. I think it's something that's really timely and something that is probably something that really good food for thought for all of us. Obviously, you know our topic, it's words matter, and we are really fortunate to have Amy with us tonight. I'm going to read Amy's bio because it's very, she's got a lot of great stuff. So Amy is the Vice President of Animal Welfare and Veterinary Medicine at ARL. She is responsible for their animal welfare and veterinary programs, including the animal care and adoption centers in Boston, Dedham, and Brewster, community operations, community and shelter medicine, law enforcement, and Boston veterinary care. That's a lot. Amy, before she was at ARL, was the Vice President of Community Medicine at the ASPCA for 15 years and was in charge of overseeing the ASPCA's high quality, high volume spay, neuter, and basic veterinary care programming. So she has a great perspective on all things community outreach related, Pets for Life related, and working with within the community. She's a fellow at the Center for Animals and Public Policy at Tufts University. She has 2 master's degrees from Harvard in language and education, and her areas of expertise are in strategy, coaching, mentoring, change management, and process improvement. She's originally from New York and lives in Concord, Mass. With her family, her cats, and her flock of hens, and is a writer in her spare time, although I don't know how she could have spare time. Amy, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Before I turn it over to you, I just want to do a couple quick thank yous. Obviously, big thank you to Amy. We also are very grateful to Tufts and the Center for Animal and Public Policy for helping us host this and being our sponsor. Ginny Chagru for helping get all of our technical stuff together, and Emily McCobb for helping us collaborate and put these together and helping be our moderator tonight. Most of you are here probably because you know a little bit about MAC, but if you don't, you can check us out online at massanimalcoalition.org. MAC is sort of hard to describe, but our mission statement sort of puts it best. We lead efforts in Massachusetts to decrease the number of homeless companion animals, homeless, neglected, displaced, and abused companion animals by supporting constructive communication and strategic collaboration among members of animal welfare communities. So that's all of you guys. It's independent people that rescue, it's large-scale shelters, and people that are working in veterinary medicine. It's kind of the whole community. So hopefully we've got a good, diverse group of people here tonight that want to learn a little bit more about this. And with that, I will turn it over to Emily with a couple housekeeping items for how this will run, and then Amy will take us away.
Yeah, so just a couple of quick housekeeping things. I think most people are familiar with the Zoom webinar platform by now after the past 1.5 years, but just in case you're not, all participants are automatically muted and your video is not on, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. If you want to say hi to somebody or give a shout out or have a technical challenge or want to tell Julia congratulations on her recent marriage, you use the chat for that. If you have a question for the speaker, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A. Amy is willing to take them as she goes, but it might be sort of hard to keep track of, so she'll definitely answer everything at the end. I'll try to interject if there's a burning issue. We are recording the presentation, and eventually we put all the slides up on the website so you can get them later, so you don't have to worry about frantically taking notes. Just echo Julia's thanks to everyone, particularly Alana and Adrian and everyone behind the scenes that helps with registrations for MAC. And I'll turn it over to you, Amy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for having me. It's really a delight to be here. Oh, we just turned into cows, Emily. I thought I was going to get to see you because I can't see anybody else. So it looks like there's lots of people here, and I'm very, very happy to be able to talk to everyone, but I can only see a couple of people. So I'm just going to talk to the couple of people I can see. It's a real honor to be able to talk about this in my world in animal welfare, and also in my family, in my personal life. This is a topic that's really important to me. And so I hope this can be a dialogue. I will try to watch the Q&A. I can't see the chat, but I can see the Q&A. So I'm hoping that if other things come up, Emily, you'll just let me know. Anybody else, feel free to just let me know. Because this should be a dialogue. This is, you know, words matter sort of it could be also titled like allyship in animal welfare, or how to be a good animal welfare citizen, because I really think we're all here because we want to do what's best for animals and their people, but sometimes we can get in our own way. And so this is sort of another way of looking at this is, let's see if I can advance my own slides. Uh-oh, can I not?
You should be able to, but you might need to click on your PowerPoint to get it going.
There we go. Another way to think about this is, if you don't have the words, try listening, right? And we'll talk about what that means. Another way to think about this is customer service for 2021. It really has evolved, and it's not just about saying please and thank you and may I help you. We are interacting with folks from all different backgrounds, people who don't look like us, and more importantly, we don't look like them, right? We don't look like our clients. The animal welfare folks tend to all look the same, and we are interacting with folks who are different from us. And the one thing that animal welfare folks are really good at doing is talking, and we're not so great at listening. And it's been my experience working in communities that I've had to get much better at listening than I have been at talking. I could talk all day long, and I've learned, so I will be talking from my own experiences. So my experiences may be different from yours, and you may be much better at this than I am. But I'll tell you that I had to get really good at listening to what other people wanted, because when I started out in animal welfare, I thought I had all the answers. And I stood on street corners with clipboards and told people what they needed. And that didn't go over so well. It got a lot easier when I shut my mouth and listened to what folks needed instead of when I told them what I thought they needed. So what I'd really like to say now is, you know, language is really one of the most powerful tools we have as humans. It's what brings us together. And so when we use it well, it can create a common understanding. And when we don't, it's like, see you later. So it's essential for creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and included. But historically, it's left a lot of people out. Individuals and groups have been marginalized and discriminated against because of their culture, their race, their ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability status, socioeconomic status, appearance, and more. I think all of you here know that we can do better, that inclusive language seeks to treat all people with respect, dignity and impartiality. It's constructed to bring everyone together into the group and exclude no one. And using language that includes, it asks something of us. It asks us to try. And so what I'm asking us to do tonight is to begin to change deeply embedded habits, and to consider the implications of words and phrases that have gone unchallenged for a long time, to dig deep into empathy that, that we may not have considered, and to imagine an experience other than our own. I'm trying to think of a good example of a microaggression. I wonder if people have experiences of them. I can give you an example. My daughter is disabled, and microaggressions that she experiences, even though my daughter is, in every way an example of someone who could come in and adopt a kitten, and she's not an example of someone who lives in communities that are target communities. And I'll talk about, when we go into this a little bit later, I'll talk about words that maybe we want to lose from our vocabulary, and target is one of them. She is not our target audience, but she uses a wheelchair. And every time we go out anywhere, people say, "Oh, look at how well you use your wheelchair. Keep it up. Bless you for using that wheelchair so well." Or, "Your wheelchair is so adorable. It's pink and it's so cute," and she uses her wheelchair the same way that you would use your sneakers. She uses it just, that's how she gets around. And she doesn't understand why people congratulate her for using a wheelchair. And yet that's what they do all the time, because that is the way that non-disabled people feel that they should be connecting with her, because it makes her stand out, and it's cute and it's pink and she's adorable and whatever. But that is an example of microaggression, right? A microaggression is a statement or an action. I looked up the definition. And it's a statement, an action, or an incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. Like, it's unintentional, right? A lot of the time, but that's an example, right? When people tell her, I've written about this in the past, where people have said, "God bless you" to her, and she'll go, "But I didn't sneeze." She's 9 years old. This happens to her every day. So that's an example, right? So, but I'd like us to think about examples that we use. I mean, that's people laugh and it's cute, right? But like, not to her. That's an example of things that we need to try not to do as animal welfare experts. These are, things that can be really offensive to people that we don't even realize that we're doing when we are approaching people about spay neuter, when we're approaching people about adoption or surrender of animals, right? When we're in other people's communities, when we are interacting on their, on their ground, or even when they're in our buildings, wherever we are. And when we use lots of different terminology that we'll talk about later, probably words that you and I use on a regular basis can be really offensive to other folks. And we'll talk about them. So why do words matter? Why do they matter so much? Words that we choose convey our thoughts and our feelings, obviously. Aside from nonverbal communication, words are obviously, they're the heartbeat of our relationships. And when we misuse them or truncate our sentences to save time, we dishonor ourselves and our relationships. Anybody who's in any kind of relationship, whether at work or at home or anywhere, we know it's so easy to speak without thinking. To not listen means that we're not connecting with people. When words are used in the wrong way, it can be devastating. Words contain so much power. So I would ask, how are we using them? How are you using your words? Words can be motivating, and they can deflate hope and dreams and actions. Words have so much power. there's an example that I like to use where, you know, there's a commercial where they say, if I tell you this burger is 80% lean as opposed to 20% fat, in a sense, you're communicating the same information, but what people get from the communication is two different things, right? People perceive the 80% lean burger as much healthier than the 20% fat option. So it really depends on how you frame something. And then you're cueing others to think about it in a specific way. So depending on how you use your words, you can drastically change someone's perspective and how they think about things. So, you know, I really think about this, particularly when I'm mentoring my staff at work, because they're the ones who speak with the public most of the time. But it's more than just the public, right? It's all of our stakeholders. So your organization interacts with so many different people, and all of them have to be considered. So when I counsel folks at work, I try to be consistent with all of the folks that we talk to, you know, and thinking about how we talk to our community residents. We also want to talk about them in the same way, right? I mean, because our community residents can look at our website, and we don't necessarily want our community residents to read something about themselves on our website that could be perceived as offensive or condescending, that they might read, oh, but that's for donors, or that's for our volunteers, or that's for the media. It doesn't matter. We want to be talking about our folks in the same way that we would talk to our clients, that we would, you know, that we want to be perceived as interacting in our communities the same way we would be telling lawmakers and our clients and our you know, that we would tell the media that we interact with our community residents the same way as anybody else. So what I'm saying is we want to think about who our stakeholders are and make sure that we're being consistent. We have an opportunity to lead by example. And if we're going to be in the communities, interacting with community residents, you can bet that I want to let board members and donors and volunteers and other community leaders and organizational leadership know how I interact with community residents, so that they know too, and so that they can learn from what it is that I do and how I talk to community residents. I've had in my past experience, what have I done? Oh, I just skipped ahead. In my past experiences, I've interacted with donors who talked about community residents in ways that I was really shocked by, actually, and disappointed by. And, you know, and so you have to think about, like, yes, I want to take your money because you're doing a really nice thing, but the way that you speak about the communities that we're serving is really unacceptable, and ways in which to mirror back to them what they're saying and how, you know, how we approach community work. It's not how we want to model community work. Okay, so staff, volunteers, and leadership. Exercising cultural intelligence is what I call it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to call, I don't know, it's hard to keep up with the terminology. We've heard cultural humility. I don't think people call it PC anymore. But I think cultural intelligence is a really nice phrase. Allyship is a word that I think will never fall out of favor. But it's the practice of looking inward and examining our own implicit bias. It's something that will never get old. I mean, I really feel like this whole topic of words matter, of being an ally in animal welfare, it really starts with us. It starts looking in the mirror. It starts at looking at what are the things that I think, and how am I reflecting what I really think outward? And I'm sorry if you can hear my children screaming upstairs. They're really loud. I keep getting distracted because they will not stop. But what is it that I'm carrying into every interaction with an adopter, with a spay-neuter client, with somebody looking for owner-requested euthanasia, or owner surrender, anything like that, any interaction I have with a community resident, what am I bringing to this interaction? What kind of judgment, what kind of implicit bias? What is it saying about me? What do I need to look at? What am I bringing? What story am I telling myself? And I really think that that is where we have to start. So this is the essential ingredient, being a just, inclusive, and sensitive person that considers the perspective of all communities. And this is where I start when I have these conversations with my own staff and with volunteers and with leadership, because if I'm not doing the work, I can't ask my team to do it. I can't ask my volunteers to do it. And I certainly can't ask the leadership around me to do it. And so, so this is, like I said, this is ground zero for these kinds of conversations. And then I fan out. Okay, so I'm sure that even though I can't see everybody on this call, I'm sure that there are folks here. I know that there are some of you that I can see that I've had this conversation with many, many times. And it really starts with trust, right? This is building trusting relationships with your staff, with yourself, with your clients. There are two things that are really important for me. One is trusting your clients, right? People are experts on their own pets, right? We want people to keep their pets. We want pets to stay with their people. So like I said at the very beginning, like I used to follow people around when I saw that they had dogs, and I would like do this and like chase them down the street and be like, your responsible pet ownership starts with neutering that dog. I see that dog has big testicles. Let's talk about getting him neutered. And like, that is not responsible pet. Like I have learned a lot about, what trusting clients means. And it means beginning to have a conversation like, oh, wow, that is a really beautiful dog. What's your dog's name? And then opening the doors so you can have another conversation, and then another, and then another. And really trusting your client. What do you need? How can I help you today? How can I help you tomorrow? Like just, hey, I remember you. You're the one with that really beautiful dog. How's your dog doing? What can I do for you today? And then, being able to continue the conversation and understanding that when they need something, they will tell you. Just being able to listen. If you don't have the words, shut up and listen. Like that's what I learned I can do best. I can listen. I can close my mouth and open my ears and trust that they will tell me if I can build that kind of relationship. And I need my clients to trust me, right? So if my clients are coming to me, that I need to be able to behave in such a way that they will do what I ask, that they will keep that e-collar on, that they will give the medication that we are prescribing, that they will come back for the follow-up appointment, that they will actually, do the things that we're asking, that they will read the flyer that we've given them, that they will do the things. So we want to build that kind of rapport. And it's not going to come if I speak to them in a condescending way, if I use words that we'll get into a little bit later. It's not going to come if I am, coming from this place of up here and speaking down to, if I'm educating, if I'm up on my pedestal, my soapbox, talking down to folks in the community about what they really need to do to be responsible about their pets. So we are sharing information. I can listen. and then maybe they will listen to me also. I have to be able to value their viewpoints, and then maybe they'll listen to me too. That this is a give and take, and that we can trust each other. Okay, so then there's donors, board members, and the media. We have a real opportunity here. If we have these relationships built within the organization and with our clients, then we can have respectful conversations and float these things up and out. And I think, when we get questions, when we get into that part of the discussion, if people have questions or specific examples that they want to go into, if this isn't clear, we can get into it. But I think, I feel like this is so exciting to be able to, to move animal welfare along and do that with the donors, the board members, and the media. It's really, really exciting to be able to have concrete examples of how this works and share it up and out. Okay. So thinking about what Lion's pet ownership crosses, it's really all of them, right? I can't think of anywhere where pet ownership stops, really. And, I like to think about like what unites us all is that why do people have pets? Why do people in poverty have pets? Why do people in X? Why do Y people? Why do Z people? Why do people from A or B or C have pets? Same reasons as you and me. They love them, right? Some people have pets for security. Some people have them to sleep with at night. Some people have them for, doesn't matter. They have them because they love them, just like you, just like me. And people are going to have pets whether you think they should or I think they should. People are going to have pets whether I like it or you like it or not. And so here we are in this business to keep pets in their homes and to match people up with pets and to keep them there. And I feel like it is my responsibility to do the best that I can to keep pets with their people and not to decide who gets to have a pet and who doesn't. So this is old news, I think, to everybody. And in animal welfare, some of these things may not necessarily apply since it is mostly a female profession. But I like keeping this slide in anyway, just because, one or two people who may or may not, have seen this. And for those who are not familiar with the Pets for Life philosophy, I really like what Amanda Arrington says here about an open and balanced mindset and how we have a tendency when we don't really think through the words that we use about reaching for familiar traditional messages that create and validate division. Right. And so that's using these same familiar terms, again, that we'll go through in a little bit, that can divide, reaching for words like us and them, that don't go for open and balanced. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Pets for Life philosophy, I encourage you to look into it. She has also a long list of terminology and suitable alternatives, and we'll go into some of them in a few minutes. I guess we'll go into them right now. The first one is, I see something coming into the question and answer. Interesting point on asking clients, how can I help today? One thing that a mentor in a new to me community suggested was to further reframe and not assume that anyone wants your help. That's great. Instead, ask, how can I serve you in your community? And really only respond to those needs which are community identified rather than what your group sees as the problem. Truly centering your clients means you may never meet your goals and being okay with that. Emily, thank you so much for saying that. I absolutely agree with you. I don't know how to do this. Do I move this to answer live? I think I do. Thank you. I think that's really an important point Emily Waltz put in the Q&A, that centering your clients means you may never meet your goals. I think that's a really important point that I'd like to address here before we go into the terminology, which is that, you know, something that I've talked about a lot with some of you here is that spay-neuter is a win for animal welfare, and spay-neuter is great. I love spay-neuter. Spay-neuter has been my life for, you know, for 15 years. And spay-neuter is desperately needed still. You know, I think for a time we all thought that spay-neuter would sort of switch into maintenance mode. Spay-neuter is absolutely a win for for animal welfare. It is not always a win for the community, right? Not always. We have to listen and hear what the community residents need, right? Folks don't always know that it's spay-neuter that they need, and sometimes they know that it's not. It may not be what they need in the moment, and so solving the problem in the moment opens the door for a prolonged discussion to get our needs met. And our needs might be spay-neuter. That might be the win for us in the long term, right? But whatever it is in the moment, like it might be, how can I serve you in your community today? And the answer might be, we need vaccines, we need dewormer, we need food, we need something else, but we have to open our ears and actually listen. And so I really appreciate the validation of how can I help today, and just listening for the answer. And it might surprise us. And I can guarantee you it might not be spay-neuter. Something else is coming in. Anne says, I'm an active volunteer in North Florida. I foster from my home state emergency disaster response team. Like a lot of my fellow volunteers, we've stopped trusting what we're being told by the staff at our city shelter and humane society. They're full and haven't accepted adult cats for over 1.5 years. We see a crisis, but it feels like there's a desperate attempt to keep business as usual. I signed up hoping to find the words to reach the animal welfare professionals in our community because our homeless pet situation is progressing so quickly. This question is late, Amy, but it feels so much like you're speaking directly to me. So thanks so much for this. Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. You know, I think that in the last 1.5 years, you know, this is sort of outside of, you know, this, but I will answer. And for you, I think for the last 1.5 years, you're not the only one who has seen a crisis in the last 1.5 years. And I think that it is related to the spay-neuter question. And I don't know that we want to go down this path right now. If there's time at the end, we can talk about it. But I think we have all been a little bit derailed in the last 1.5 years by the pandemic. And so I will say that we are all a little bit still digging out from a lot of issues related to the pandemic, by not being able to do spay-neuter for the community, by not, you know, being able to be business as usual. So I think everybody has seen a setback, and I am not surprised that you see what you see as a crisis. And so I really congratulate you and admire you for keeping on. And I'm glad that you're here. I really am glad that you're here. Please keep putting your questions into the chat box, folks, or into the Q&A box, and I will answer them and address them as they keep coming in. And for now, we will move to some terminology that, you know, that could be problematic. 18 months prior to the pandemic. Yeah, so it must have been. And is clarifying that it was 18 months prior to the pandemic. You and I can chat afterwards, Anne, if you like. So I'm going to go on and say that responsible is probably my #1 problematic term when people talk about responsible breeding, responsible pet ownership in particular. There is no, just like in, you know, there are other terms, there's no, you know, certified definition of responsible. So, you know, there's no ideal like definition. If you look up in the dictionary, responsible pet ownership, there's no like, you know, A+ gold star standard definition of what responsible pet ownership means. It's really subjective. It is entirely a matter of lacking access to resources. I would say, and I think all of us would agree that people, or at least I hope all of us would agree that people are overwhelmingly caring. People by and large have pets because they love them. That's why people have pets. And, you know, a phrase like responsible pet owners, you know, having a policy about responsible pet ownership, I think is something that belongs in the past. I would love to have us all break the habit of using this word to describe people or to judge people that they are irresponsible pet owners for not spaying or neutering, or they're irresponsible pet owners for doing XYZ or not doing XYZ. Something I would love to see in the past. We want to adopt a non-judgmental approach towards folks in our communities. And, you know, I would say that by and large, when we see people doing something that deep in the recesses of our mind might strike us as something that is responsible or irresponsible, or that, you know, conjures up an image of irresponsibility, I challenge you to say this is something that somebody just doesn't know about and that we can share information instead. It's something that they don't know about and you can teach them, right? Okay. So here's another, you know, them and those people. This is, I mean, people have names. You can use their names. It can be really divisive to say them. It tends to be, you know, obviously it's unavoidable to use some sort of pronoun. What I mean, to be very clear, is this is something that can be very, it's the term that I'm looking for. I'm trying not to be judgmental in just describing. When we say them, it's very othering, right? Because a lot of the time we're using this to avoid using a more judgmental term for folks in our community, specifying a particular type of ethnic group or racial group or group of people who live in a particular neighborhood or something like that. So they shouldn't do this, or these people do that, or this type of group of people, or that sort of thing. And it is something that we should probably not, we should not do. It's very othering, very divisive. People have names, and it's really okay to, in this day and age, it's okay to describe people by their ethnicity or by their race, as long as we're not generalizing, because everybody has a race. White is also a race. It's actually an okay thing to do, to describe people as a white person or a Black person, because that's, you know, that is a descriptive marker. I would not use it as a generalization and say all Black people do X or all white people do Y. So I would not generalize with or without a descriptive marker. So I would not say the benefits of spay neuter is lost on, or are lost on, all people who look like this or on them. But an alternative to this is, it's important to be patient and clear when telling the community about procedures that may be unfamiliar, or we're going to visit the Smith family, instead of saying them. I hope that makes sense to folks. Educate can be problematic because it can be very condescending. Education on pet care can do very little. When I worked at the ASPCA, the medical director I worked with liked to say that the most important resource we offered when we worked in the community was information sharing. And I thought that was really amazing, that information sharing was so valuable, but educating was not. Right. And when you think about it, education, you know, is so, it can be so condescending to be the teacher up here, like in the front of the room, and the students all small, you know, in the back. But education, but information sharing, like here's a phone number, here's a flyer, here's a resource, here's a link, here's how you sign up for this. Did you know that? Oh, here's a YouTube video on how you can do this. I'm going to give you some information on how you can do this at home. You know, here's an appointment, come back for an appointment. We'll give you 20 minutes on how you can do X, Y, XYZ at home so you don't have to come back. Like that is information sharing. Like that was really valuable, and how you can do things at home so you don't have to come back. That was really helpful. And as I said, this is what she said was the most important thing we could do for our clients. Focusing efforts on creating consistent access to services, sharing information along the way. That is actually something I do. I correct people all the time when they say that we need to educate people so that they can be responsible pet owners. I don't like to correct people, you know, but I will if I have to. And this is the one that I will absolutely stop people and say, you just can't say that anymore. Neglectful and cruel also raise flags for me. Most of the time when we are in areas with limited resources, when we see things in homes that we don't necessarily love, that let's just say we see animals living lives that are not necessarily the way my cats or your cats or dogs or my birds live. It's the difference between good enough and the way, you know, that the way that my animals might live or your animals might live, but it's not cruelty or neglect. Most of the time, it's not cruelty or neglect. Not always. And that's why we have law enforcement departments, and that's why we have animal control officers, because there is cruelty, and I won't lie, but most of the time it's not. And so we have to take care with how we label people and their situations with these words, because it can be hurtful, and it's almost always inaccurate, and it can damage people if there are punitive measures taken when what they need is information sharing and access to resources. I like to think that people are inherently good and not malicious, and that they're doing the best they can with what they have. It's important that we are discerning and we, you know, take measures when they need to be taken, but that we not use these terms when it's not necessary. Okay. This one, I know that that not everybody agrees with me, but this, because the word help is well-intentioned, of course. But I think that, as I put in here, that affluent people don't have the market cornered on power and self-sufficiency. And so lots of people who live in poverty, you know, or who may need assistance can be incredibly resilient and creative. And there's also, you know, to some extent, the terms serve and support, you know, do similar things, but just, you know, be aware that, you know, you might want to just change up the words help and serve and support. They're, you know, so I try to use the words provide services or support communities instead of helping communities, because that too just sort of sounds very self-serving to me. Then these two, poor and at risk. At risk is more problematic to me because it's vague and it's assuming, and at risk of what? You know, it just sort of sounds very generally at risk of, I don't know, you know, it can be problematic, I think, when you think at risk of, I don't know, at risk of, I don't know, like there's some sort of target on a person or an animal's forehead. So a phrase that I tend to use is underserved. I think resource desert is another term that people use. I tend to take a lot of this terminology from human services, social services. Their language tends to be a little more progressive, a little more, you know, evolving. Even DEI work is a little slow to evolve. I hate to say, but it's true. Social services is really where it's at, if you want to borrow language. Target, I just used it like this is a thinking about, nobody wants to feel like they have a target on their forehead or on their back. So area of focus is one that a lot of animal welfare groups picked up after some larger groups were giving out grants for targeted spay neuter. We all started using focus instead of targeted areas. But there's a lot of other words out there that you can use other than target, specific neighborhoods. I think lock the block was one phrase that Pets for Life was using. There's lots of better phrases than targeted, targeted neighborhoods, targeted audience. I don't know, you could do a lot better than target, because I sure wouldn't want to feel like somebody who is a target. And then this one also, I guess it depends, community cats is probably a better term than feral or stray, but it depends. It really depends on what you're talking about. I think the reason that feral or stray can be problematic is it really depends on the conversation. But there are some animals that seem like they're not connected to an owner or to anyone, are actually part of the community, and residents are looking out for them. I've done a lot of work in Los Angeles, for example, where the cats 100% live outside, never come inside, but are also 100% connected to owners, to homes, to families, and are absolutely in some respects owned. They are not feral. Well, they're feral, but they're not stray. So calling them community cats because they're part of the communities, they have owners, they have caretakers. Community cats is a preferable term. Depends on where you are, it depends on the context, but we just call them community cats where we are here at ARL because of that. And then finally, actually I've got two more. Always and never. I found that on the internet. Always and never are two words you should remember. You should always remember never to use, because this is, again, the kind of thing that, you wind up, it's like us and them, or, those people. Always and never statements are always false and never true. You wind up backing yourself into a corner, I think, and you end up making people angry. So I say most of the time or sometimes. And then actually and just are things that can be really belittling to people. So it just sort of does exactly the opposite. I'm at work and somebody says, hey, that's actually a pretty good idea. It makes me feel like a complete idiot. Like I just made this, wow, like, oh, she really said something actually relatively intelligent. Like it was a big surprise. Or if somebody says to me, you just need to do it this way, like you could just omit that actually or just and say, we do it this way, or hey, that's a pretty good idea. Then there's no belittling in the statement. So that wraps up the dictionary or thesaurus portion of our chat. And I wondered if people had some examples of interactions with communities or any questions that they wanted to talk about. And Eve have you heard any research or discussion on the use of owner versus pet parent and rescue versus adopt? Oh, I don't know about research, but so much discussion. And I have my own personal thoughts about them. I don't know which you would like me to share. I will share my own, since I'm like talking in an echo chamber, Eve, I will share my own personal thoughts, which depending on where I have been in my own personal journey, that's another term I don't love, as an animal welfare professional, I have sort of come to the conclusion that owner and adopt are my preferable terms. I think pet parent is acceptable. I really think anything that you want to say is fine. You can use owner, you can use pet parent, you could use companion, you could use really any guardian, whatever. But the truth of the matter, no matter how I feel about it, as a person, as an animal protection person, personally, as a professional, I have respect for the law, and the law says that animals are property. And so I think of myself as a pet owner, even though I sleep with my animals in bed, and they are my babies as much as my humans are my babies. I'm a pet owner, and I use pet owner in work documents, and that is a legal term. So pet owner is where I have landed after many, many years of personal and professional debate. And adopt is a legal term. And I think that rescue can be a very loaded term. I think it can be a loaded term. So I'll just leave it at that. And I think that when we're talking about adopting an animal from shelter, I think adopt is the way to go. Rescue means something different to me personally. And so I think when we're talking about adopting an individual animal from a shelter, I think that's an adoption, if that's what you were asking, Eve.
Amy, I just wanted to share that if somebody wants to give an example and you want them to speak, I can actually make it so that they can speak. And then one question that someone had messaged me was, how do you feel about using the word it to refer to animals?
Well, do you mean because they're spayed or neutered?
I don't know what they meant. I think they might mean it because it tends to be used as an object versus a creature, but I don't know what they meant. Oh, as opposed to she or he.
Well, for me personally, this is getting into like what I think personally. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to pets, that's kind of,
I find that one to be tough because in the animal welfare world, we sort of fought for a long time to have animal, like for example, if you're publishing in an academic journal, you used to get your paper returned to you because they, if you refer to them as they or it, because it's more like an object and not them as an individual creature. So having them as he, she was considered like more progressive from an animal welfare perspective. But recently I've had a number of younger students that are trying to make sure that we use inclusive language towards people with different gender identities. And so they actually would prefer that we refer to the animals as they, because we don't necessarily know the animal's gender identity. So it can be really complicated, I think, right now, is trying to figure out the right way to do it. So I don't know what your opinion is, but I do think it's harder than it used to be.
I think it's tricky. I'm not sure that, so I don't really know. And I mean, when it comes to humans, I'm very sensitive to gender identity. I'm not really sure how that extends to animals yet. I'm not sure that I know that it doesn't, but I'm not sure that it does, but it doesn't feel right to call an animal it. So I think I would err on the side of calling an animal they if I were to call an animal something other than he or she, I would prefer to say they over it, but I don't know. And that's not speaking from an academic standpoint. That's just speaking from a, purely animal person standpoint. I don't know if that answers the question very well. And I see Christine has put in the Q&A, I don't use the word pet. It denotes a hierarchy over other animals. I like companion animal and I call myself a guardian. As a lawyer, I understand that non-humans are owned under current jurisprudence, but this should be changed. A new language is part of that change, I think. I also do not refer to human babies or non-human animals in the neutral pronoun it. This is part of bringing change through language. I completely agree. I don't disagree at all with you, Christine. This is just, this is just preferential. I went for a very, very long time, not completely unwilling to use the term owner. And it's just something that I think I've come to terms with, that's, I think to each their own, but I agree with you on the word it. It doesn't feel right to me. We have I have a couple more slides that I wanted to see what other folks had.
There's a bunch more coming in.
Great. Two came in at the same time. Anna says, in some contexts, I think saying this is why can be alienating. Yeah. For example, when someone comes to you with a question about an issue they're having with their pet, I have heard them get defensive after the person who's addressing their issue says, this is why it's so important to X. They've responded, I know that, or I did that. I think it can feel presumptuous. Yes, I agree completely, Anna. Thank you so much for saying that. And Emily says, perhaps one way to settle the it is if the animal is tied to a person, then just use whatever that person uses. Also known as mirror the preferred term for that person to build rapport. Yes, I think that's great. And Christine says, also, I'm not cool enough to use they yet. Yeah, well, we're on our own path. I think I really like what Emily says about mirroring the preferred term. Completely agree.
I was in the habit of always referring to people's pets as bud. Just like, hey bud, it's okay bud. And man, some owners really do not like you to call their animal bud if it's like Fifi. So I like that sort of mirroring as kind of a sign of respect to the owner and their relationship with their pet.
That's great. Other thoughts from folks in the audience or participants?
I have one while we're waiting, which is about, I ask everyone this question, but how do you distinguish a microaggression versus like a genuine curiosity or question that, you might ask or need to ask kind of in a genuine spirit of getting to know someone? How do you make sure that you're not treading onto microaggression territory?
What do you genuinely need to ask in the spirit of getting to know someone?
I'm trying to think of a good example, but like I could see, I think that there's like a gray area around like what constitutes discrimination. Like I think asking somebody what they need to be able to be successful or to be able to achieve a goal is clearly not a microaggression, but sometimes you can get anxious about having those kinds of conversations because you might stray onto, you may just by asking the question, like, can you reach this, stray into territory where you might be worried. And I just was wondering if you had any tips.
Well, I think, who was it that I learned from, who's the, Emily, help me, who's the oncologist from U of I that
oh yeah, I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember her name.
She taught me to ask, not can you reach this, but like on a scale of 1 to 10, how feasible is it that you achieve this goal, in a way that makes like, how realistic is it, instead of can you, that you have to ask yes or no, so that it, you know what I mean? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how realistic is it that you give, you know, insulin twice a day? Or, you know, how realistic is it that someone is home to give this medication? Or how realistic is it that I could teach you to give like an IM injection, or, you know, that kind of thing that takes all the judgment out, you know, that way. There are ways, like we reading like Atul Gawande and having these like, you know, mirroring those sort of end of life conversations for animals instead, in a way that's non-judgmental. Like, what are your goals around end of life? Instead of like, how far do you want us to take this? Like in a way that is more like confrontational. Like those kinds of conversations were very, you know, in that kind of way, we're very, we're less microaggressive when you take out any sort of assumptions about culture, assumptions about how does it, you know, how is it in your culture about end of life? I don't know. But I think if it's in the spirit of getting to know someone, I don't think any question has to be asked, is the short answer. Nothing has to be asked, but if it has to be asked, if it really has to be asked, I think there's a way to ask it indirectly in that way on a scale of 1 to 10. Or like, if I were to ask you this, like, how realistic is it, you know, to take out the direct, the confrontational, but even if we're not talking about at work, even if we're not talking about like you know, a veterinary patient client type of conversation, if we're talking about just, you know, just in the context of animal welfare, of doing outreach, of trying to understand like how to convince someone to spay neuter or not, or like when to back off about that, or like, is this a cultural, like, am I going to try to pressure you into spay neuter or not, or something like that? Like, is this a question of like a nice white lady with a blonde ponytail knocking on somebody's door, and like, I know I don't look like the people that I'm, you know, knocking on the door of, like, that can be okay. You know, it really can be. Like, if the next best thing to looking like the people in my community is, you know, just being able to listen to the people in my community, like, that's also okay. It's not a microaggression to be like a middle-aged white lady, like with a t-shirt from a animal welfare organization on a clipboard. Like, that's not an offensive thing if I can like not be a jerk about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not inherently offensive if I can like be like, hey, I genuinely like, how can I help you? Like, my group is here. We have resources. Tell me what you need. Like, can I meet your dog? What's his name? He's really handsome. You know, can I pet him? Like, if I can walk into somebody's apartment and not act like there's roaches everywhere, or like, I don't want to touch anything. Like, if I can like squat down and say like, your dog is really handsome, can I pet him? You know, and like actually act like I'm happy to be there. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like that's not a microaggression. Like, if I can be respectful, you know, I think that there's a real difference in approach. So I know that you're not saying any of these things. I'm just sort of riffing off of what you're saying. Like, it really, I think the approach is the difference, because I don't think that our clients expect everybody to be just like them. I think that folks with pets just know that sometimes they don't have all the resources that they need. And if somebody is going to try to provide them, that like, they don't want to be sold something they don't need. And if they know what they need, that they just want to be asked, what do you need? And I think that's plenty.
Cool. A couple of other questions, suggestions in the Q&A.
Yep, instead of trying to figure out he, her, she, it, whatever, you could also use the pet's name, Brian says. Excellent, just like people like the sound of their own name, they also like to hear their pet's name used. Excellent suggestion, thank you, Brian. And Janice says, I don't think people should expect all dogs to tolerate them touching them and doing things around them. I believe people should choose a dog that will suit their lifestyle. My cattle dog just lives with me and very protective, but a friend thinks I should want her to, in other words, put up and shut up when looking out for me? Why do people just want to have so much control over a dog? Why can't people learn how to be around a dog that just doesn't know them or isn't in their life in any way? Yeah, that's a great question. I do not know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know that I have the answer to that. Emily, any suggestions?
I'm not sure what the question is there.
I don't know how to, I have lots of thoughts about words. I don't have a lot of thoughts about other people.
I think it's bringing up for people all kinds of difficult conversations that have come up, because there's been a couple things in the chat about maybe people not hearing you or whatnot.
Yeah. So I'm gonna, and I'll continue to, to address questions that are coming up. But here is, this is really about condescending approaches, or not being condescending, and some other words here. This is another thing I stole from the internet. But, there are some words that I have flat out told my team that they are not allowed to use. And I cannot control the things that sort of scurry through my head, right? I can try, right? Like I said at the very beginning, this is a conversation that starts by me pointing the finger at myself, by taking a look in the mirror. And I challenge my team members to do the same thing. But like when I hear in an operations meeting, when I hear, in staff meetings, people starting to talk about things in a judgmental way about a person who comes in to adopt an animal, or about a particular area, or about a particular community, or something. And I can give examples about if you really want me to. I don't know if you want me to. But I don't even want to go there. These are phrases or adjectives that can be rude. They are mansplaining. They sound entitled. They can be racist, sexist, classist, ableist, ageist, homophobic, transphobic, and worse, they could be illegal, right? You don't want your staff to be talking like this about, in front of, around our clients, or any of the other stakeholders that we mentioned before, right? And honestly, I don't want to be thinking like this anymore, because it's judgmental and it's just not 2021, and it's not how I want to be raising my children, if it comes down to that. But like, this is not how we want to be interacting with the people in the animal world, or at least I don't. And so like, this is not going to get us to the next level in animal welfare anymore. And so I challenge you to, to bring this back to your groups and to your staffs and to your volunteers and to your, to your folks. Like, the next time you hear, what's mansplaining? I think mansplaining, oh, I spelled it wrong. I'm sorry. I don't know. I have a typo in here. It's mansplaining, not mainsplaining. I can't believe I spelled this wrong. Mansplaining. Google it. When men do women and non-binary folks the favor of explaining things that we don't necessarily need an explanation for, but men seem to think that the world would be better with their explanation. I think the internet could probably do a better job. I'm sure there are plenty of YouTube videos of mansplaining out there. But this is what I mean. Like, we don't need more of this in the world. Yes, the term is totally rude. All of this is rude, is what I'm saying. Yes, so thank you, Karen. Karen is putting this in here. Isn't the term rude? A lot of this is rude, and we don't need more of this, is what I'm saying. It's exactly what I'm saying. All of this is judgmental, all of it, and we need less of this in the world. We need less of this in our we need less of this in animal welfare. We need less of this in our veterinary clinics. We need less of this in spay neuter. We need less of this in adoptions, and we need less of this in community medicine. We need less of this in general. And so, again, it starts with us being honest and open with each other and with ourselves, right? So we need to be on the hook with each other. If we hear ourselves and each other talking in ways that engage some of the phrases that we talked about earlier, if we catch ourselves being judgmental about each other, about our clients, about any of the things that came up tonight, I feel like we have a responsibility to each other and to ourselves to be honest about this and say, we don't want to talk like that anymore. Our words really matter. And we want to be more open-minded and have a non-judgmental approach about the areas that we want to serve, about the folks that we want to be open to, about the way that we want to do our adoptions, about where we want to be offering spay neuter and to whom and why. So here are some questions that we can ask ourselves before any work-related communications. Are my efforts and my messages being driven by the needs and voices of the community? Am I being considerate with my language? Is what I'm saying or writing based on the individual or the specific situation, or does it feed assumptions and stereotypes? Could my message be misinterpreted? What would be the impact if it was? Would I be comfortable saying or reading this to people in the community, this thing that I'm writing for the website or for a PSA? Is it something that I would want my clients to be reading as well? And then we can do some more Q&A, but what we're talking about tonight, how do I model what I've learned? So like what I was just saying, would I interrupt this harmful language or behavior in the moment? Even my own? Can I speak up? Can I correct myself in the moment? How do I amplify underrepresented voices? How do I question and challenge norms? And how do I give credit where credit is due? And then finally, remembering that we want to maintain thoughtful communication with all of the stakeholders at all times. And that's all I have, but we do have lots of time for more questions and answers. So, or to hear stories from other folks here.
Great, I'll just see if any more questions come in. I think you answered a lot of them along the way, so there may not be a ton left to say, but give people a few minutes here. There was something in the chat, and I guess that person isn't able to put it in the Q&A. I'm not really sure what they're trying to ask, but like, I think they're asking if people don't want to hear something that you know should be taken seriously, how do you address that?
Well, you mean like a client in the community?
The example she gave was she tried to explain to her friends she shouldn't give her dog so many treats each day as it made her have diarrhea, and she totally dismissed me. So I guess that could be an example of a scenario where we are trying to information share with a client. And so how do you handle that conversation when you're trying to help, but they're not, maybe they're not in a place to hear what you're trying to say? Certainly we have those conversations all the time.
Every day. I mean, this is another one of those things where, you know, I think it's really about building trust, and you can only do so much I wish I had a better answer than that, but I mean, I like to think about this, and I've talked about this with many, many folks about building trust when it comes to spay neuter, but really this sort of, you know, this is appropriate, I guess, with, you know, with the treats or with anything, with a client, whether it's a client or a friend, if the person in question sees you as a credible, you know, resource or source of information, and you open the door a little bit, then you can have the conversation again, and you can have the conversation again and say, no, you know, no, really, like, this is what I do for work. And, you know, you'll see if you keep giving your dog these treats, this will continue. And, you know, you don't have to take my word for it now. You'll see it's going to continue. And then the next time you see your friend or your neighbor, like, is it still happening? Like, oh, it's, you know, you could give him, you know, chicken and rice, and that might help combat the treat situation, but it's probably not going to go away. And my recommendation would be to stop. But there's, you know, you can't force it, right? You can't force it. And I guess it's really up to you. Do you continue having this friendship or not? But I mean, I don't think that's what you're asking. I mean, what you're asking is, if you cannot force them to stop giving treats, just like you can't force someone to spay neuter. But when people are asking me, you know, what do I do? Can I make them spay neuter? No, you can't make them spay neuter, but you certainly could say, why don't you come for, I don't believe in, no, we're not going to give you vaccines. No, we're not going to deworm. No, we're not going to do any of those things. Why don't you do that and say, we'd really love it if you made a spay neuter appointment, but today we're going to give you your kitten or your puppy's vaccinations, and here's information about spay neuter, please come back. I'd rather leave the door open and start to build a trusting relationship with folks in the community, and leave the door open to come back to have a conversation about spay neuter. So I'd rather do that, slowly build up this conversation, slowly build trust. And I would recommend doing that with your friend or your neighbor, so that when the dog continues to have diarrhea, as you know they will, then they can say, where do I go? And do you have a vet that you can recommend? And then you can send them to Dr. McCobb.
Not to me, please.
Sorry, Emily.
Couple more questions coming in now.
Yeah. Okay. Emily says, given the lack of diversity in animal welfare, can you comment on the appropriateness of a well-resourced organization and community to help versus putting the organization's resources into capacity building within the community, which lacks access to care, political power, financial resources? Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. Oh, it's such a good question. Oh, Emily, what a great question. Yeah, I mean, I sure can. So the question is, the appropriateness, commenting on the appropriateness of a well-resourced organizations coming in to help versus capacity building within the community that lacks access to care and political power and financial resources. And I mean, I guess the real question is, what's a well-resourced organization? You know, I'm coming from a $300 million a year organization, and then now at a $12 million a year organization, both of which thought they were under-resourced in some ways and are, you know, and thought they were appropriately resourced in others. So I don't really know what a well-resourced organization looks like. There is no diversity, or very little diversity in animal welfare, and I don't really know what a well-resourced organization looks like. So there's that. And I think that any organization coming into, as you said, quote unquote, help, your help is in quotes. And I think that that's the key term, right? Anything that an animal welfare organization does to quote unquote help is really a drop in the bucket. And, you know, there is no way that an animal welfare organization is going to solve poverty and change any given area, any given area's access to resources. I think the big issue that I was seeing on the national landscape is that first is that spay neuter is part of basic veterinary care, and that across the nation there is a lack of access to veterinary care, right? And in some areas, the lack of access to veterinary care includes basic things like spay neuter and vaccines, and in other areas there is access to spay neuter and vaccines, and the lack of access to veterinary care is less basic than that. But across the board, this is a huge problem. So I would love to say that I would much rather see a concerted effort across the nation of organizations putting their resources into capacity building in communities that lack access to care. But I don't, that's like, I mean, it's not even hard, it's not even that it's hard for a nonprofit's board to stomach, like it just sort of makes my head explode to even think about how to do that. That's so huge. But that's the, I mean, that's the end game. Like that's the long haul, the long-term amazing goal. So, but I mean, what a succinct way of putting it. I mean, like we used to, when I started working in animal welfare, and I think many of you on this call would probably agree, we used to say like, oh, like the point would be to like spay neuter and then we all put ourselves out of a job in 10 years. Like that's what I want to say. Like if I could do what you just put in that sentence, like then we'd all be out of a job for real. Wouldn't that be amazing? So I love it. Okay, Eve says, there was a discussion at the New England Federation of Humane Societies about rescuing a pet as setting up the relationship to have the pet owing a debt of gratitude for being, and the person is potentially upset when something goes wrong, as the pet being unappreciative for being rescued, versus adopting a pet where it would be framed like a parent-child, where you'd known there'd be happy and challenging things ahead in the relationship, but you'll love them through it all. Oh. Wow. Wow. Well, so I bring a lot of baggage to this discussion. So you might have to save me here, Emily Macabre. So I bring a lot of baggage of my own to this discussion, Eve. I'm glad that I missed this conversation. I am an adopted human. And in the human adoption discussion, there's a lot of backlash for, in the adoption community, for like adoptees not feeling grateful for being adopted and rescued, and not feeling gratitude to, you know, for being saved and so on. And so I don't know that I can really safely speak to the difference here. This looks like semantics to me. I don't really know how an animal would know the difference.
I think,
but
yeah,
help me here.
I think the parallel, Amy, and I think it speaks to the fact that language is important and certain things can be triggering. Sure. But I do think it speaks to this thing about there's something going on with us and our need to help. Sure. And so if we really make it more about providing resources for the community and partnering, then that sort of dynamic goes away. You know, when we need to help, or we need to save, or we need to rescue, that's really more about what we need and less about what the community is telling us that we need. So I think that's why those words, why that context can matter.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, one more.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
last minute questions.
Okay. Yeah,
We're kind of at the end of our time. 6 minutes. Oh.
Yeah, thanks for addressing this topic. Coming up with language that will make it more likely that people will change their behavior if behavior change is our goal is important. And I think it is. I think behavior change is the goal. And remembering, like, people mess up all the time and the goal isn't getting this perfect, right? I think that's the important thing, right? And I think that that's like what I love about this last slide, this picture, you know, is that like, nobody expects us to get it perfect all the time, right? We can just reach out to each other, and like, humans are imperfect, and conversations and communication, it's always imperfect. But if we just try to connect with each other, like, I think that's okay, right? Clients know that we don't have all the answers, but they don't expect us to, but they have some of them, right? And if we ask and listen, then they might have the rest. And that's all that matters, is that like, they will listen to us if we listen to them and we respect each other. So just remember, like, parting words is that this should be a non-judgmental approach. Non-judgmental is really what I try to remind myself of, like, Amy, non-judgmental, Amy. That's my mantra. So I hope this was helpful. It was really helpful for me to get feedback from you all, and I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you so much for having me. Anne and Julia, I really appreciated it. And thanks, Emily, for doing the chat and for facilitating.
Yeah, and there are some good shout outs in the Q&A from people in the chat, and lots of thank yous.
Amy, can you hear me?
Yep.
This was wonderful. I think it makes all of us take a step back, perhaps, and it helps us to think before we speak. And if we speak first and then think, maybe apologize. You know, I think that this is really important. And I think that there are words that hurt and words that create division. And I think this is a very, very good start for us to be able to think about this in our profession. So I wanted to type that in the Q&A, but I'm not getting there. So, so thank you for this very much.
I just want to echo that. Thank you so much. And I think one thing that you said that really stuck with me was, you know, whatever you're writing, do you want your, is your audience your donors, or do you want the intended recipients to see it and hear it that way too? You know, what's going to sound appropriate and kind and compassionate to all audiences. I think that's just something that I can sort of take with me as I write things for work and look at it with that lens, and then know, am I ready to send this? So that was my golden nugget takeaway from this. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for the night. Emily, anything else that I'm missing?
I don't think so. A couple more things popping up in the Q&A, but it's more just thank yous. So nothing that we need to address. So I'm going to stop the recording and end it now. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks,
Amy. Thank you so much. Everybody have a